Cleopatra, a name wrapped in silk, smoke and controversy, remembered for beauty, romance and scandal, but almost never remembered for what made her truly dangerous, her mind. This is the Cleopatra Rome didn't want the world to see, not the seductress of propaganda, but the chemist, the scholar, the multilingual strategist, and the political genius who nearly changed the fate of the ancient world. Hollywood made her a temptress. Rome made her a villain. History made her a mystery. But Cleopatra made herself something far greater. A ruler intelligent enough to rival Caesar, and a scientist curious enough to dissect the secrets of life itself. This is the story of Cleopatra, the thinker, the innovator, the mind that terrified an empire. Stay with me, because the more you learn about Cleopatra's intelligence, the more you'll understand why Rome feared her more than any army. Before Cleopatra ever ruled a kingdom or defied an empire, she walked the marble halls of Alexandria's royal palace, a world where knowledge was power, and the greatest minds on earth gathered like stars around a flame. Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was the city of knowledge, home of the great library, center of mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, capital of philosophy. A place where ideas flowed like water from every culture. Most rulers treated scholars as ornaments. Cleopatra treated them as teachers. She studied under philosophers, mathematicians, physicians, linguists, and priests. She didn't just read scrolls, she absorbed them. By adulthood, Cleopatra could speak 9 languages, solve complex mathematical problems, debate philosophy, understand trade, economics, read scientific treatises, interpret religious symbology, conduct chemical experiments. She grew up in a world where knowledge meant survival. Because in Cleopatra's family, ignorance was fatal. People often forget this. Cleopatra was a scientist, not in the poetic sense, in the literal one. She conducted chemical tests, studied the properties of plants, minerals, oils and venoms, and collaborated with Egyptian and Greek scholars. In the ancient world, chemistry was not separate from medicine or cosmetics. It was one unified science, and Cleopatra explored all of it. Recent archaeological findings near Tel Temai revealed a perfume factory believed to be connected to Cleopatra's court. Cleopatra was known for creating fragrances that lasted longer, locked into the skin, acted as natural antiseptics, reduced infection, and left an unforgettable impression. These were not vanity projects. These were chemical innovations. Roman elites wrote that Cleopatra's presence lingered in a room even after she left because the fragrances were unlike anything in the empire. She used science as influence. Cleopatra collaborated with physicians on herbal medicine, antidotes, painkillers, sedatives, beauty compounds, skin treatments, venoms and antivenoms. She didn't just apply ointments, she understood how they worked in the body. Cleopatra wrote medical texts, now lost, which early historians referenced as expert-level knowledge of pharmacology. This is not the resume of a temptress. This is the resume of a scientist. Cleopatra lived in a world of palace assassinations, poisoned cups, and political rivals who vanished without explanation. Her studies weren't just academic curiosity, they were survival. She tested toxins on prisoners, studied symptoms, and refined antidotes. Ancient sources claim Cleopatra searched for a death without pain. Whether myth or fact, it reflects her obsession with understanding how chemicals affected the body. Rome would later say Cleopatra died by snakebite. Egyptian accounts suggest poison. Either way, Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing, a chemist to the very end. If Cleopatra's scientific mind made her brilliant, her political genius made her unstoppable. Egypt was collapsing when Cleopatra came to power. The economy was dying. Rome controlled Mediterranean politics. Her family was at war with itself. grain shortages triggered riots, foreigners dominated trade, corruption infected the court. Most rulers would crumble under this. Cleopatra turned chaos into fuel. What made her different? She understood people, she understood nations, she understood Rome itself. Cleopatra wasn't relying on beauty. Cleopatra was relying on psychology. Let's break down the genius. Master of multi-layered communication. Cleopatra used different personas for different audiences, something no Roman politician could match. For Egyptians, she appeared as Isis, mother of the kingdom. For Greeks, she acted as a Hellenistic scholar queen. For Romans, she spoke their political language better than many senators. For diplomats, she became a calm, calculating negotiator. She could shape herself not to deceive, but to connect. This was her superpower. Cleopatra spoke to Caesar as an equal. This cannot be overstated. Cleopatra is the only Eastern monarch Caesar ever treated as an equal. Why? Because Cleopatra understood Rome better than Rome understood Egypt. When she was smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled in linen, she didn't act seductive. She acted strategic. She discussed politics, trade routes, Egypt's grain economy, Rome's droughts, Eastern alliances, her position as rightful ruler. She offered Caesar something no Roman ally could: a stable Egypt under one brilliant mind. Caesar wasn't charmed by beauty, he was impressed by clarity, intelligence, and vision. That terrified the Senate, because if Cleopatra could influence Caesar through intellect, she could influence Rome itself. Cleopatra played Rome's civil wars like a chess grandmaster. Rome's political system was in collapse. Caesar versus Pompey, Antony versus Octavian, senators versus dictators, generals versus generals. Cleopatra didn't randomly choose sides. Cleopatra always backed the figure best positioned to stabilize Rome, because Egypt's survival depended on Rome's stability. Her decisions weren't impulsive, they were strategic, and for a long time those strategies worked. Cleopatra reformed Egypt behind the scenes. While Rome descended into chaos, Cleopatra rebuilt the economy, restored national pride, reformed the currency, reopened trade routes, improved taxation efficiency, invested in education, strengthened the navy, and stabilized regions long ignored. Egypt thrived under her rule. She turned a bankrupt, divided kingdom into a regional powerhouse, again all while single-handedly navigating Rome's constant storms. This wasn't seduction, this was governance. Cleopatra used science as statecraft. Here is where her brilliance becomes unparalleled. Cleopatra used chemistry, medicine, botany, fragrance science, nutrition, toxicology, dyes and cosmetics, agricultural knowledge as political tools. She crafted perfumes as symbols of prestige. She used medicine to win loyalty among elites. She improved agriculture using botanical expertise. She built chemical-based luxury goods that made Egypt indispensable to Rome's economy. Egypt became not just a kingdom, but a brand. Cleopatra understood something few leaders ever do. If you want to survive an empire, don't fight it, become essential to it. Cleopatra's scientific interests weren't side hobbies. They shaped how she ruled, how she negotiated, how she survived, how she died. Imagine a ruler today who is simultaneously a head of state, a diplomat, a scientist, a pharmaceutical developer, a cultural icon, a strategist, a polyglot, a scholar. That was Cleopatra. She was not the last pharaoh by coincidence. She was the last pharaoh because she was the last mind capable of balancing Egypt on the edge of collapse. Cleopatra stood at the crossroads of science and statecraft. Her reign was a balancing act between chemistry and diplomacy, knowledge and power, Egypt and Rome. Part 1 revealed the foundation of her brilliance. Now we enter the era where Cleopatra used that brilliance to challenge the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. This is Cleopatra at her peak, the master strategist, the innovator, the negotiator, the scientist queen. And this is the part of her story Rome tried hardest to erase. Hollywood loves the love story, Romans loved the scandal, but historians looking closely see something else. Cleopatra and Antony were a geopolitical alliance first. Antony controlled Rome's eastern territories. Cleopatra controlled the wealth, grain, ships, and resources Rome desperately needed. Their partnership threatened Octavian because Cleopatra had money, Cleopatra had ships, Cleopatra had influence, Cleopatra had intelligence, Cleopatra had Egypt, Cleopatra had Caesarion, a potential heir to Caesar. Antony brought military force, Cleopatra brought everything else. Together they formed a power bloc that could reshape Rome. This terrified Octavian, so he did what weak men do when facing a stronger opponent. He turned public opinion against her. Octavian needed the Roman people to hate Cleopatra, not just dislike her. Hate her. He created a weaponized version of her. Cleopatra the witch, Cleopatra the seductress, Cleopatra the poisoner, Cleopatra the snake, Cleopatra the foreign threat, Cleopatra the manipulator of poor Antony. Why this angle? Because no Roman could accept the truth, that Antony followed Cleopatra willingly, because she was the smarter political strategist. So Octavian rewrote Cleopatra as a temptress who bewitched him. It worked, but Cleopatra didn't respond with rage. She responded with strategy. Cleopatra strengthened Egypt's economy, built up her navy, solidified alliances in the east, and crafted a royal image that unified her people. Rome had propaganda, Cleopatra had policy. While Octavian sharpened his political knives, Cleopatra turned to a weapon no Roman fully understood: scientific influence. Her knowledge of chemistry wasn't a hobby, it was political currency. Here are the ways Cleopatra used science as statecraft, perfume as economic power. Cleopatra's perfumes weren't just luxurious, they were trade goods, diplomatic gifts, symbols of prestige, tools of influence, products that only Egypt could produce at scale. The Mendesian perfume, historically linked to Cleopatra, was so long-lasting and complex that modern chemists still struggle to replicate it. Cleopatra understood that whoever controls beauty controls culture, and whoever controls culture controls influence. Rome had armies, Cleopatra had fascination, medicine as alliance building. Cleopatra's palace labs produced ointments, salves, anti-inflammatory balms, sleep aids, antiseptics, skin treatments, herbal painkillers. Roman leaders were constantly ill from war, age, stress, and political anxiety. Cleopatra's remedies became a quiet, powerful leverage. If you wanted the best medicine in the Mediterranean, you needed Cleopatra. This is the kind of soft power modern leaders dream of: toxicology as political protection. Cleopatra lived in a world where rivals disappeared after dinner parties. Her knowledge of poisons and antidotes wasn't sinister, it was necessary. Knowing which herbs killed, which slowed death, which numbed pain, which preserved clarity, gave her an advantage few rulers had. It meant she could protect herself, she could detect assassination attempts, she couldn't be easily manipulated, she couldn't be taken hostage without a plan. And eventually, it gave her the power to choose her end. When Octavian declared war, he didn't declare war on Antony. He declared war on Cleopatra. This was the clearest political signal Rome ever made. The true opponent wasn't Antony, it was the Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra responded with brilliance. She financed Antony's legions. She built a fleet capable of challenging Rome. She secured regional allies. She provided supplies and logistics. She unified Egyptian support. She communicated directly with Eastern kings. She prepared Egypt for siege. She knew Actium would be the deciding moment. But Actium wasn't lost because Cleopatra failed. Actium was lost because the winds turned. Antony's commanders betrayed him. Octavian's navy had superior positioning. Confusion broke ranks. Half the fleet refused to engage. Cleopatra made a strategic retreat to preserve what was left. Rome framed it as cowardice. But the truth, Cleopatra knew the battle was unwinnable and acted to save her navy and her kingdom. This wasn't fear, it was calculation. After Actium, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria and launched a final political gambit. She attempted to negotiate with Octavian directly. Cleopatra offered Egypt's treasury, Alexandria's loyalty, withdrawal of her fleet, diplomatic terms, even abdication in favor of her children. She tried everything except surrendering herself. Because Cleopatra knew Octavian wanted her alive, not to spare her, to parade her through Rome in chains, a humiliation worse than death. Cleopatra would rather die a pharaoh than live as a spectacle. When Antony died in her arms, Cleopatra made her decision. She would not be taken, she would not be displayed, she would not give Octavian the triumph he wanted. A pharaoh chooses her fate. The method of Cleopatra's death remains debated, but one thing is undeniable. Her death was controlled, intentional, and rooted in her knowledge of chemistry. The snake story is famous, but likely exaggerated or symbolic. More likely, Cleopatra used a poisoned ointment, a toxic comb, or a fast-acting plant-based mixture she developed herself. Ancient sources agree on one thing. Cleopatra sought a death that was quick, calm, painless, dignified, certain. Only someone deeply knowledgeable about toxicology could accomplish that. Her final act was not romance, it was science. Her last moment was not weakness, it was sovereignty. Rome erased Cleopatra as a thinker, because Rome couldn't compete with that image. They turned her into a villain because acknowledging her brilliance would undermine their victory. They downplayed her scientific work because Romans valued military power over intellectual power. They painted her as a seductress because the truth was more threatening. Cleopatra was one of the most intelligent rulers Rome had ever faced. Her genius outlived her death. Egypt's perfume formulas influenced Rome for centuries. Alexandrian medicine became the foundation of medieval pharmacology. Her political strategy shaped Roman Eastern policy. Her legend survived every attempt to bury it. A mind like Cleopatra's cannot be erased. When Cleopatra died, Egypt lost more than a queen. The ancient world lost a scientist, a philosopher, a politician, a linguist, a strategist, a chemist, a visionary, and the last pharaoh, Cleopatra didn't fight Rome with armies. Cleopatra fought Rome with intellect, with innovation, with curiosity, with adaptability, with knowledge passed down since the age of the pyramids. Rome won the war. But Cleopatra won the story, because thousands of years later, we're still talking about her genius. And that may be the greatest victory of all. If you want to see Cleopatra in a completely different light, watch the next video about her forbidden relationship with Julius Caesar. It reveals the woman behind the legend.